Hi guys, welcome back to the podcast. Today I'm joined by my friend and fellow practitioner, Rosie Tadman, who was on the podcast years and years ago, right at the start. It was something like episode number 4 or 5, I think. You can go back into archives and dig that one out. But she's back again after now having more experience. She's also got 2 children now, so she's a mum. And yeah, we didn't see each other for like 5 years, and then we live now nearby to each other, so we're definitely going to meet up more. And I wanted to get her on the podcast to talk all about fertility issues, because that is her area of expertise. But before I cover what's going to be in this episode, let me just tell you a little bit about Rosie if you're not familiar with her and her practice. So Rosie Tadman is a nutritional therapist who studied at the prestigious College of Naturopathic Medicine, the place that I studied at, but she was at the one in London. I was in Manchester, and I think she was the year above me. She has a home clinic in Chorlton, which is in Manchester, and she sees clients from all over the UK and occasionally further afield on Zoom. She uses modern science plus traditional wisdom to support couples and solo mums or dads-to-be to conceive, and she looks at the root causes rather than masking symptoms. So a practitioner after my own heart, and we love doing this work, and we always have a little catch up and discuss what's going on in the world. So Rosie is a practitioner who welcomes people from all different walks of life through her virtual door. Whatever gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation or religion, everyone is welcome. And fertility issues can affect everyone, so that's why she does that. And she enjoys working with diverse individuals. So after the episode, I'm sure you're going to want to follow her. So Rosie's links and websites will be linked in the episode show notes. But because this was such a long and juicy episode, we actually were we were on a call for about 2 hours, but it was an hour and a half for the podcast recording. I'm going to split it into 2. So in this first part, we're going to cover how Rosie got into nutrition and then ultimately decided to specialise in fertility. She overcame IBS and some quite embarrassing symptoms. So she finally figured that out, and she goes a little bit more into her journey in the first part of the episode. We talk about how conventional medicine and the traditional procedures such as IVF are different to the type of work that we do. They can both go together a lot of the time, and it's only going to improve your conception rates and all of those health markers and everything if you do improve your diet and maybe take some supplements if you're going through that conventional route. But the holistic and naturopathic approach that we have is a little bit different, because we're looking at why do you have fertility issues in the first place, and let's optimize you as much as possible before you go into this it can be quite a difficult time, and it's a lot on the body. It can be quite a physically intensive time too. And then we go into, in this first part, some of the common causes of unexplained infertility. But as you're going to notice, we typically change our language and are very mindful to say things like subfertility or fertility challenges throughout the episode. But I know in terms of what people look for when searching infertility is like a hot kind of catchy term. Unfortunately, it's very common these days. So we want to shed light on some of these things to be looking into. And in the episode, we're going to cover how the vaginal but also endometrial microbiome could be partly at play, and how things like high natural killer cells might not be the thing to focus all of your attention on. This was like back a few years ago, NTHFR in the fertility world, this genetic mutation was all the rage, and now it's kind of swapped, and a lot of people are asking me and Rosie about natural killer cells. But again, no surprise that we have a more holistic natural opinion on them. And then we discuss how poor egg and sperm quality is probably one of the biggest factors as well, because your egg is how your progesterone is produced. The quality of the egg determines the quality and strength of the progesterone, and we know that low progesterone is a huge driver of miscarriages and infertility and just hormone imbalances in general. So if you're someone who's listening along like I used to, just on these fertility episodes, but you're not wanting kids now or ever. Like, it's great that you're learning about this, and hopefully you can share this with people who might benefit. And we discussed how sperm quality is important. That's why fertility is really 50-50. So if you're the female doing all of this work on your health, changing your diet, detoxing, taking the supplements, but your partner still isn't exercising, isn't drinking water, is drinking too much alcohol, is just being sedentary and unhealthy, then you might want to get them into shape and give them some more education and share this episode with them to let them know that all of this work that you're doing isn't going to be that effective if they're not also putting their part in. There's also information on testing to consider, both conventional and also functional lab testing that could be good websites, loads of good resources as we go through the episode. But yeah, today's part 1 is going to be on mainly the vaginal microbiome, endometrial microbiome, and sperm and egg quality. So I won't keep you waiting any longer. We're going to jump straight into the episode. I just know that you're going to love Rosie as much as I do. And yeah, hopefully I'll see you back here next week for part 2 on even more fertility and hormone information. So have a great day, guys. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. Today, I'm joined by practitioner and friend, Rosie Tadman. So we've just gone through Rosie's bio and a little bit about her work. But yeah, Rosie, share how you got into nutrition in the first place and decided to specialise in fertility.
So I think, like many practitioners, I was originally in the corporate world. So I'd done business and a HR degree. I'd then gone on to working in big corporate organisation like Mars Chocolate, which I do get the irony, Jiu-Jitsu, Teach First. And although I didn't hate my job, I just never really felt that fulfilled. And I'd always had IBS to the point that, you know, and you're like, looking where the toilet is just in case you might have an accident sort of level. Not ideal. Gone to the doctors, kind of had never had any, it was kind of that generic, oh, you've got IBS, just live with it. I was like, well, I don't think I want to live with the thought of maybe constantly pooing myself. Like, that doesn't seem like a good way to live. So then discovered the functional approach to nutrition. And then I also went to a Patrick Holford talk in London, which I was living near there at the time. And he did a whole talk at CNM where I ended up studying on like pill for an ill, how there is another way to look at the body than kind of the conventional medical approach. And I went with my dad, who was down in London at the time. And I should remember saying to him, this is what I'm going to do.
Yeah, I love those moments. I remember I went to see a nutritional therapist and everything just worked out so perfectly because she ended up being the director of studies for the Manchester one, and it just felt like the stars were aligning. And I just knew when I went to like an open day for CNM, not that we're plugging CNM, the College of Naturopathic Medicine, we both studied there. Rosie at the London branch, I was at the Manchester one. But yeah, I just felt when I was listening and reading more, I was like, this is it, this is what I'm going to do. So
I think it's such a different way to look at nutrition, like, you know, and you've always been kind of taught like, and my thought on food prior to studying was pretty much calories in, calories out. Like, that was literally what I thought it was. Food was something to be controlled so that you didn't gain too much weight. Like, I kind of had all of the, which is like crazy to think that. I used to think like that.
Same. And I thought at one point that I wanted to work with like food and health, or I wanted to be like a carer or nurse, but none of those ever clicked, so it just made sense. I went to study health and social care, but it was very pushy down the like nursery worker or social worker, and I just didn't feel like it was right. So that's when I had my like year off. I went to America, and then health issues started. And when I got back, I found the naturopathic nutrition route. So I was the same. I just felt like I love food, I love health, but I don't want to be someone who prescribes diets and calorie counting or works in a hospital.
Yeah, which leaves the naturopathic approach, functional medicine approach.
So what happened with your health? I'm guessing you figured it out?
Yeah, so I figured it out. No longer had IBS. Probably off the back of it, I would say the ongoing work after was more of a work around my relationship with food. So my IBS was resolved, like, hooray. But then it was like, and throughout studying, actually, I would say I had more of a, like, my food must always be healthy. Like I had maybe a bit of an over restriction. But that's also kind of processed that and out of that, which I think is hugely important when you're working with other people within nutrition. And fertility was really an interest to me because I knew one day that was something I wanted to embark on myself. So I think there's always that, like, invested interest. You know, if you think you might benefit from it, why not learn more about it now?
Yeah, or something that you're currently going through, and that can kind of evolve. Because I don't know if you were the same, but after every lecture, if we did one on like musculoskeletal or digestion, after everyone I was like, right, this is what I want to do, apart from the sports nutrition one. But that one I was like, no, definitely don't want to do this. It's too regimented, controlled, and I just wasn't a fan of that. But at one point I was like, I want to do work of the gut, and then I realized like most people have a bit of everything. Most people need support in all different areas, so you don't have to niche yourself into just gut health. Because even if I'm working with a client with PCOS, for example, the gut is probably going to have to be addressed anyway. So I've tried to become more holistic in my approach. But pretty much from the get-go, you were like down the lane of fertility. Is that right? From when you set up your practice?
Yeah, female hormones and fertility. Which, like, female hormones for me is so linked with for fertility, obviously, and it's more of a, sometimes I'll have women who they don't want to conceive at all, but they want support with their endometriosis or fibroids or whatever it may be, or they do want to conceive, but maybe in like the mid to long term future. So yeah.
And I'm just curious, what made the biggest difference for your gut health?
So for me, I had parasites, so blastocystis. I went down the really restrictive carbs, lots of parasite, antiparasitics, enemas. Mine was like go hard and go quick approach, which has its downfalls. Like,
but in hindsight, you're like, I could have done this a lot easier and
yeah, exactly, like
kinder to myself.
It was like bish bash bosh, not that pretty. I would do it differently now, but it worked. And in actual fact, that was a good lesson for me in general, that there are so many different ways to skin a cat, so to speak, and different ways to do it. And just because something changes and the way you do something changes, doesn't necessarily even mean it was wrong. There just might be a better way to do it.
And what about with fertility? Has anything changed dramatically since you first qualified to how you're practicing now, like your approach with that?
Yeah, I think yes. I think one of the continuing shifts that I'm making is around my language around food. And like, I know one of my clients the other day, and I'm loving it, was kind of taught, she's a counsellor and therapist herself, and she was kind of talking about the window of tolerance and kind of that like hyperstimulation at the top, that hypostimulation underneath, and her work is to get clients within that window of tolerance in the middle. And I'm like, ultimately that's also my job, but through functional medicine is to get them in that window of tolerance, but also through the language I use. So I don't want to trigger someone with the language I use with food, like cringe when other nutritional therapists say like clean eating or naughty foods, or, oh, let's make a guilt-free version of this brownie. Like, no, like that in itself is perpetuating that orthorexic kind of disordered way of eating. So I think I've definitely made sure that I'm not creating any distorted eating in people. That's something that's definitely grown as I've been within practice. I think also definitely less plant-based, which I think you can definitely, I know that's something you talk about. Yes, plants are important, but also ideally those animal foods are vital as well, whereas I was probably more plant-based when I first graduated. Also more like holistic in terms of like lifestyle supports alongside it, rather than just focusing on the nutritional side. So like that kind of like biohacking side of things, other things that can help get your body back into balance.
Yeah.
So I'd say there, and also just with fertility, there's usually like a flavour of the month or the year. Like I feel like MTHFR is like a gene mutation, like the thing.
I think people have realised there's no missing kind of bullet here, no silver bullet, but they kind of move on to the next, don't they? I think that's at its moment, that's gone, that was so 2018 or whatever. I know
so,
it's
like,
what would you say it is now?
Yeah, and like the things people ask you, like literally 4 years ago when I first graduated, every other person that called me was like, oh, what do you think about MTHFR? Like, I don't think anyone's asked me since I've returned from mat leave this time about MTHFR. I'm like, oh, I don't exist anymore. So yeah, I think it's more you're guided by what your potential clients are reading, because they're the things that they're asking you about.
What's the hot topic at the moment?
Yeah.
What would you say?
Oh, what is the hot topic?
Yeah.
I would say like NK cells. I think we've spoken about that. It's probably one that a lot of people, and vaginal microbiome is probably the like the vaginal microbiome, like the guts. If you think when we started studying 9 years ago, I still feel like gut health was fringe. Like it was still like a bit like, oh, that's you sure? Like it has that much impact on health. And now it's like pretty much a household recognized thing, even within conventional medicine. And I'd say like vaginal microbiome is now like the toddler or the young child that in 5-10 years time will be like, obviously vaginal microbiome has a massive impact on fertility, in the same way that gut health does. So I think, yeah, probably NK cells is one that I seem to be getting asked about a lot about at the moment, but I'd say vaginal microbiome is the new area of research that is exciting.
And we're going to go down a, like, not a deep dive, but I'll touch more on that as we go through, because in the episode today I want to share more of these common causes of fertility issues, and that is one of the 5 that we want to talk more about today. But just to touch on the NK cells a little bit more, if someone's like, what does that mean? Do they need to be aware of it? Is it important, or is it just another thing that's kind of like MTHFR? It'll be good to know, good to test, but isn't the be all and end all.
Yeah, so NK cells, natural killer cells, which sound horrific, like, oh my god, what are these? Tell me about them. Are a part of your immune system that would predominantly kill viruses. And you can be tested for NK cells. And there's some research that suggests that if they are raised, then that can potentially inhibit implantation. Functionally, although that may be true to a certain degree, I'm like, but what is raising those NK cells? Like, why? So although conventional medicine would go, their go-to for raised NK cells is steroid.
Immune suppressants.
Yeah, immune suppressants. Yeah. Which interestingly, they weren't allowed to use during the initial lockdown because of the risk of, well, if you're on immune suppressants and then you get COVID, you may die, was the worry. So a lot of clinics actually had to go down the antioxidant route because they had no other option at that point, and did actually see a lot of clients. And I know like a lot of clinics were like, oh, this really has helped. But then as soon as they were allowed to prescribe they went back to that. But for me, NK cells, I'm like, well, why are they raised? What's happening within the endometrial microbiome? What's happening within the gut? What's happening within the nervous system? Rather than just suppressing something. So
you said before, viruses, is that like the main thing? So hidden viruses, or do
I think it can be
infections trigger it?
Yeah, pathogenic bacteria as well. Yeah, they're the two kind of main causes.
And what antioxidants were they using? Just out of curiosity.
I think they use, most clinics were using like a mixture, so I think they'd often use like A, D, E. Yeah, like the fat solubles were often the kind of go-to that I saw. Clinics. So.
What about things like melatonin?
And I never saw
cells. No,
I never saw any clinics.
That was a thing for COVID, wasn't it? Like melatonin was recommended for that.
Oh, was it? I didn't.
Not mainstream, obviously.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Really
interesting. But that's got so many additional benefits and less side effects than the immune suppressants. But it's not as profitable, is it?
Yeah. And they're on, with the way that we work, it's hard to do that double-blind clinical trial of one particular thing, because we're looking at loads of different things to help get the body back into balance, which is like why it's so difficult to, like, say if someone's arguing the benefit of conventional modern medicine over complementary, holistic, root cause functional, whatever you want to talk, however you want to term it, is ultimately like we think about the body completely differently. Like, you're trying to fit like a round peg in a square hole, or a square peg in a round hole. Like, we see everything as interconnected, whereas someone within conventional medicine would say, well, there's no double-blind clinical trial for what you're recommending. Well, you can't put how we work in a double-blind clinical trial. So,
but do you still think they can work side by side? Like, if you had a client already booked in for IVF, what are some of the things that you would do to support them?
Totally. I mean, would totally depend on the individual. Okay. I mean, like with functional medicine, root cause, so say we're working on egg quality, sperm quality, you're going to need a 3 to 4 month lead time to make changes. Like, it takes 3 to 4 months for an egg to mature. It takes 3 to 4 months for new sperm to come through, for that turnover. So it's not something you can do overnight. So when someone calls me and they say, oh, I'm starting a new round of IVF next week, is there anything you can do? I'm like, no, not really, because it needs time.
They'll hate that answer though.
They hate that, yeah, I know, yeah. No. I mean, I have had people when they've said like, I'm going for a round next week, but can we work together now just in case it doesn't work? And I'm like,
going into it with a positive mindset then.
Yeah, I'm like, clearly, but I mean, it's even within IVF, like, people will have the different funding options. So some people will have bought like a 12-month package where they can like have as many rounds within 12 months as possible, as they want. So for them, it's like, oh, I'll just give another roll of the dice in inverted commas, and if it doesn't work, then I'm working with you as backup. I suppose what I try to relate to clients is, I mean, obviously it's down, there's no right or wrong with any of this, but it's just an understanding. I think it's really underplayed, but how much going through a round of IVF can take its toll on the body. So I do really think I've worked with clients where, and they'll say like they feel it in their body, but because there's nothing like quantitative that they can pin it to, they kind of disregard it. But I'm like, their fertility has declined and declined and declined as the months and the years have gone on. So I think sometimes that, like, trying to get people to stop, to take note, to stop chasing their tail is really difficult. So when you want a baby yesterday. Like saying to someone, wait 3 to 4 months, that is like a lifetime when you're so desperate to hold this little baby in your arms and to get the 2 lines on that pregnancy test. Yeah, I don't know where I was going with that. And
I was going to ask about the IVF process. Now, has that changed at all over the past few years, or is there anything like upcoming that you see kind of potentially going to happen in the future?
I would say
it's going to become like a bigger and bigger, more commonly used thing.
I would say like the biggest theme that I've seen just generally is it's just become more transactional. The clinics are, I suppose, trying to make rounds cheaper, a round of IVF cheaper, but to do that you've got to take something away, which is often the upfront investigations. So I'd say it is becoming more of a churn, and I think that's what clients are relaying to me, is it is becoming more of a churn. It's hard to find clinics where they really kind of take stock. So I'd say that's a big theme. And I think that's kind of a theme. I think everything's just becoming more polarized, whether it's in with IVF or whether it's just within healthcare as a whole. It's just becoming more transactional or holistic. Like the two worlds are kind of growing independently, which ideally we want them to grow together so we can integrate them and take the best from both worlds. That's how I see it anyway. But I don't necessarily, sadly, see it going in that way.
I agree. And something that I love about your work, and something that I try to do too, is around my language. So we were talking before about the food things, so not calling them sins or bad foods, good foods. And with fertility, I know you say the term like subfertility a lot. I sometimes say like fertility challenges, because I think even the term of infertility is a very like set thing, like you're infertile and it's not going to happen. Whereas fertility challenges or subfertility, there's kind of a more positive spin on it. And I think the words that we use, the language that we use, has a massive impact with whatever condition that we have. And something that I realized with my clients is that early on, when I started to practice, I would use all of these lab tests. And because I found so much benefit of getting information about my body, I would kind of do the same thing for my clients. So we'd do like all sorts of lab tests, stool tests, and then I'd not diagnose, but I'd tell them that they have issues with like parasites and dysbiosis, and you have fat malabsorption, and you have adrenal issues. And then they leave the call like glad that they've got some answers after years of not having anything, but then they're like, oh my God. And they kind of take on all of these labels as the, not personality, but the kind of destiny. And that can be really hard to undo. So I've become even more cautious with the words that I use. So especially with fertility, I think that's something that is very much seen with the IVF process and the medical system versus holistic and specialist practitioners like yourself. So I'm guessing that is a thing that you're doing on purpose.
Totally. Like it was fertility. I mean, I should say, like, a lot of the clients who come to me have been trying and struggling. I've had less than half a dozen clients who have come to me because they've not got any hormonal issues or anything and they just want to optimize. Like, I would love for that group of people to increase, because that's also important. That
if anyone's listening that they're in that category, like, please do the work.
The work
as much as you can. Like, you can't always guarantee the end results, but it's just gonna take so much stress and time and even money out of it. Like, if you get things under control before they become a huge problem, then that's always the goal.
100%. And like, even give the very basic example of a female's microbiome, vaginal health. Like, if that's not tip top, it may not impact you conceiving one iota. You may conceive in the first time you've had sex once and you're pregnant, you've had a baby. But then you'll often hear that, oh, my baby's got colic, they've got allergies, they've got eczema. Like, that is so linked to so many other things later down the line, that if we can really, and I think it's raising awareness without making people feel guilty if they don't want to do something. It's like getting that balance right. That 3 to 4 months pre-conception phase, before the egg and sperm have even met, can provide such exponential difference to your future babies and your health. But I don't think we often talk about that. But the people that often come to me have been struggling for a long period of time. And that is often means that they've been very done to. Like, they've been going to the doctors and the doctor's been doing tests for them. They've been having IVF done to them. So I think my approach is, I don't want to be another like doing it to them. I want them to feel empowered and enabled by us doing it together. is kind of how I would try and reframe it.
And do you get the men on board too, the partners?
Ideally 50-50. Sperm and egg health are male female fertility are just as important, if they're willing to come on board. So, and there's often different camps of men who are very happy to do that work and other men who aren't. I mean, typically it is the woman who would contact me first and their partner would then also come on board too. I have had instances where sperm results aren't good, but because doctors or fertility specialists have said, doesn't really matter about sperm health though, because we can just do ICSI, which is where they insert a sperm into an egg. So don't worry about that. Then.
But you're like, what? The quality of the sperm that you're putting in there isn't going to be good.
Totally. But because they've had that.
No, it's like fine.
In white suit, doctor title, who said that, you're then really trying to, without, and I don't, it's, if you're ever forcing anyone to get on board, like there's going to be such jarred energy of them coming on board. It's not going to work anyway. They've got to want to do it. So all I can do is educate, and then ultimately the decision is down to them. But ideally, both sides of the equation for sure.
And are things that affect sperm kind of similar to the things that can affect egg quality?
Yeah.
Can we go into a few more of them? Because I know that that's one of the 5 common causes of unexplained fertility issues.
Yeah, so for sperm health, all of the usual functional things can impact sperm health: gut, hormones, nutrient status. There might also be, say, like obstructions or varicoceles or things that actually need a urologist or an andrologist support with, that is completely outside of scope and we wouldn't be able to get to the root cause of.
Is that typically like found with regular like investigations though, if they were going through like the doctor or IVF clinics?
Yeah, or at least a referral to a urologist would be able to let you know.
And that's what we should use the medical system for, is to use them for things like the scans and the structural issues, or if someone has like one fallopian tube or something like that, like that's where IVF really shines. But it should be kind of like a last resort, but it's now becoming like, oh, I've been trying for 6 months, let's just push you down this route.
Yeah, like that is the solution, which is not, it's even the solution or often the solution, even when people have had a couple of miscarriages and it's like, well, they can get pregnant. It's not, that's not necessarily their full story. But yeah, with sperm, the same issues or infections can affect sperm quality. I mean, there's even research, you know, being on like the seminal microbiome, like how important that will be. Antioxidant status, like how DNA is presenting within sperm. Like it's all valid and it's all important. And not all of that shows up on a conventional sperm analysis. That's very much like one view into looking at sperm health. It's not everything.
And what's the panel that you would typically, so the DNA fragmentation?
DNA sperm fragmentation kind of looks deeper into what's going on within the sperm.
Can people request that if they are seeing a fertility doctor or going through IVF clinics?
Every IVF clinic will pretty much do a sperm DNA fragmentation test. There are now lots of companies are realizing that historically, to get tests done, it's like go to IVF clinic, they do the test, and then you're kind of under the umbrella of that clinic, whether you want to conceive naturally or not. That was the only route to go to get testing. So there are lots of companies now where we're more promoting like the at-home test, or like you can send off. So like Fertility, they do lots of fertility tests that you send off. And I noticed the other day they actually do a DNA sperm fragmentation that I've recommended for the first time to a client yesterday. So I've not had the results back and I've not had their experience of the process, but it was a lot cheaper than going to a clinic, because a DNA sperm fragmentation can be £400-ish, whereas 150.
Wow.
By fertility.
Amazing.
Yeah, there's lots of companies who have recognised that an IVF clinic is the only way pretty much at the moment to get lots of these tests done, but IVF might not be the answer for everyone. So
yeah. But if they've already got the test done, then like, oh, we might as well just go with this because we're already here now, we're already signed up, so let's just do the full shebang. And when you said before infections can affect sperm quality, is that mainly sexually transmitted infections, or can it be other like gut infections, some of the ones that we talk about here on the podcast, so things like bacterial or fungal, yeast overgrowth, parasites, can they affect the sperm?
Yes, I think like the more conventional kind of like STI type ones are the ones that we would hear about and know about the most. But I think definitely any sort of systemic inflammatory response to something can ultimately impact sperm health. But it's not really like a causal link of you have this infection that equals your sperm, that means your sperm health will be affected. It's mind-boggling how like sometimes people can have all the things wrong with them and they've got amazing sperm or amazing, like, and you know, it doesn't always match up, which is mind-boggling.
And the way that I think about it and describe it to clients, because it's kind of like, even not on the subject of fertility, if someone has recurring vaginal thrush, they might have, it might be stemming from a systemic fungal infection, likely from the gut, because that's like the central hub of the microbiome, so this rainforest of bacteria and yeast and parasites. And if that one's off, your other microbiomes of the body are also going to be off, like the skin microbiome, the oral, the vaginal, even something like the bladder. Any mucous membrane, the bacteria is going to be thrown off. But then you might have someone who has major fungal overgrowth in the gut, a woman, but she doesn't have vaginal microbiome changes. It's less likely, but it can happen.
Yeah, and you're like, how? Like, how does it work? And also I see a lot of couples where they're just passing it between the two of them.
So how would you navigate that? Like put them both through a protocol at the same time?
Potentially, or have, say, if usually the male is asymptomatic, and the female is usually not. So I'll have that discussion of whether they both want to do it together, which would be the preferred option. But in actual fact, I have found that when, say, I've just worked with the woman and we've worked on the vaginal microbiome, that if we can get it robust enough, that often then, even if I haven't worked with the male, that, and then they're having sex again after that, it doesn't necessarily in the future equal a flare. So I suppose it's more about the resilience of the vaginal microbiome.
It's like the immune system of the vaginal microbiome. So if it's like really weakened, then any bacteria that comes in, it's like with UTIs, it's not the bacteria that's the problem a lot of the time, it's that it's not being kept in check by a healthy, strong immune system. So you want to, if there's like a real big infection and influx of bacteria and fungus coming in, then it's a lot harder. But if we just work on strengthening her defense mechanisms, then it's less problematic.
100%.
And how common do you see sexually transmitted infections? Because I know that in the medical world, the treatment are things like antibiotics, and it's always like, if you catch it early, that's the best option. But these chronic infections, is that a common thing, would you say?
I would say
with your client base?
Microbiome.
In terms of fertility issues,
I would say
is like a sexually transmitted infection holding them back?
Like by the time they've come to me, I've never had anyone with a current sexually transmitted infection, because that would have been so far in the past in terms of being dealt with. And if they haven't been tested, then yeah, we definitely need to make sure they go back and get tested. But usually someone's story, they've already kind of done that. But what I do see is when in the past they've had a sexually transmitted infection, that's been dealt with, but that's thrown off their vaginal microbiome in other ways, which would be deemed less like serious. So they might have like recurrent BV, or they might have recurrent thrush, and they've just never quite recovered from that initial STI, which may have been like a decade ago. Like it's not even in like recent years. So I suppose I am more supporting the more nuanced things that can go on, other things that conventional medicine can't support.
Okay, and I do want to talk more about the vaginal and endometrial microbiome in a sec, but last question in terms of egg health and sperm health, the biggest driver, I'd say, I don't know if you agree, would be like this oxidative stress and inflammation. So anything that's damaging the cells, because they're very like sensitive, the egg and sperm. So this term oxidative stress is basically inflammation, and that's why we need antioxidants to combat that. But why is there so much oxidative stress? What are the big drivers, do you think, that's causing this inflammation in the first place? Because we don't want to just assume that we have a problem and start loading up on antioxidants if we've not actually fixed the underlying reasons. And I know there's many, so like the main ones.
So I'd say lifestyle, personal care, home, environment. So those
like toxin exposure.
Yeah, within your environment, I think has a massive impact on internally and our systemic oxidative stress. So I think it's definitely looking at those areas first. I would also say internally, infections, intolerances, unknown allergies can also cause that oxidative stress. So it's removing those barriers rather than, like you say, just recommending antioxidants. And also being undernourished, not having enough nutrients in the first place is really can cause that oxidative stress. So I'd say those are three.
Yeah, and so many people, especially women, don't know that they're under eating, because they might be eating a lot of greenery and low calorie, low protein foods. But when you add the numbers up calorie wise, not that that's like the most important when it comes to diet, but it is a factor you have to like investigate further, because I've definitely gone through periods of intentionally at one stage, but then unintentionally under eating, because I was trying to heal my gut and I was bloated after everything that I ate, so I just didn't eat as much food, and I didn't really realize that calories were still important, because I'd swung the other way, like calories aren't important at all, but they actually are, because I then had another time of my life where I've been overeating, like too many calories, because I was downing all the oils and nut butters and seeds and avocado and everything. So calories are important, people, but
they're not nothing.
The undereating thing is huge.
Yeah, undereating, and like with undereating, if you think like egg and sperm, they're not essential to life, so they're the last thing to get. They'll get like the dregs of your nutrients, like your brain and your lungs and your heart, etc., are going to kind of get first dibs. So it's really making sure that we're loading up on that nutrient density. And I think pretty much every client will get an organ meat suggestion. Their protocol.
That's good. Same here.
Yeah.
Cool. So on to vaginal and endometrial microbiome. Is the conversation that we just had on the vaginal microbiome pretty much the same when it comes to the endometrial?
I think a lot of the time, but not always. So if someone is vaginally completely asymptomatic, there's no issues, then I wouldn't be recommend, and like no history of it, but say they have had recurrent miscarriage, or they've just had implantation failure after lots of rounds, or trying to conceive naturally, then I would probably be saying let's more go for an endometrial microbiome test, because I'm like, well, yes, there's a massive Venn diagram, and the vaginal and endometrial do arguably overlap quite a lot, but not fully. So I do think there are instances where if they're asymptomatic, it's worth going further up the body. But if they are symptomatic, then normally I'd go for the vaginal microbiome test. It's easier to do and it's cheaper, and I think pretty representative, most probably, of the endometrium as well.
And when you mean symptoms, do you mean things like miscarriages or the recurring BV or yeast infections?
More vaginal, symptoms rather than the fertility symptoms. So if they've had recurrent BV or recurrent thrush, more of those sorts of symptoms.
And I checked the very first episode that we ever did. I think it was like episode 5 or something of the podcast, so many years ago. It actually got quite a good number of downloads, and I can't remember exactly what we spoke of, but in the title we touched on cervical mucus. So I'm just wondering how this ties into the conversation of the vaginal and endometrial microbiome. Is there a connection, like the lack of production? Does that mean there's a problem?
No, I wouldn't say they're massively like linked. I mean, there are some links. So say if a woman's got thrush, like if they have intermittent thrush, then sometimes they'll like struggle to notice fertile mucus, and therefore they struggle to identify their fertile window because they're like, oh, is it sticky or is it more egg white wet? But you could have lots of issues with your vaginal or endometrial microbiome, but equally have really healthy cervical mucus or vice versa. So I wouldn't say they're particularly directly linked.
Okay. I was just thinking if someone's got like poor vaginal microbiome health, they might not be able to produce as much.
I would say cervical mucus is like the production, like that's really dependent on estrogen and hydration. I would say like the two real key things. So I'd say it's more like when someone's tested low on estrogen, that kind of like under eating picture, or the dehydrated, that's typically when cervical mucus is lacking.
And I know that there is a home test for the vaginal microbiome. So I personally use the in vivo swab.
Yeah.
But what about the endometrial one? Is that something that you'd need to do at a hospital or again at a clinic?
So there are different options. So there's a test called Emma and Alice. So that looks at, and that's a test that you would have to have done. It's iGenomics who own the test, but they sold the rights to sell it to IVF clinics. And that you would need an endometrial biopsy to do that test. So you need to go to a clinic. It's, I think about, it's 700, 800, 900 pounds, somewhere in the region of that.
Would you say that's worth the, like, how invasive is the procedure, and are the results worth that procedure? It's kind of like with endometriosis, people are like, it'd be good to find out, but is the risk of the laparoscopic surgery and everything worth it? Like potentially getting more scar tissue?
I would say there's a much better way to do it that's less invasive and less expensive. So Fertility, who are the company that I spoke about before, they do an endometrial microbiome test, but with menstrual blood. So you would send them the menstrual blood. They're in Greece. There used to be another clinic I always used to do it through, Serum Health, again in Greece. But because of Brexit, it meant that like the menstrual blood has to get to them in a certain amount of time. And if it doesn't, the test is void and they can't do it. And it was taking like 3-4 weeks for the test to get to them. So they were like, I can't do it again. So Fertility have kind of sorted out all of the kind of like the Brexit shipping issues, and it gets to them within 3 to 4 days. And I don't know why more clinics aren't promoting menstrual blood. I've asked, like, I know Dr. Nadir, who I've spoken to before, he's a fertility gynecologist, like, why are more clinics not doing menstrual blood? And he was just like, I don't know, like, we're just historically like not, like there seems to be no valid reason. People
just think it's like this waste product and like there's nothing valuable in there, but it's like it gives you so much feedback, even just month to month with your period when it comes, the consistency. It can give you like a report card about your health, so there's definitely going to be insight if you analyze it further, the cells or like whatever's in there.
100%.
Yeah.
And I think one of the big issues is, say with the Emma and Alice that iGenomics they kind of sell, it's always kind of like, oh, it's just a little endometrial biopsy, nothing much. You know, and I'm like, let's stop underplaying how invasive something like that can be, and like what trauma that can, either with tiny T trauma or capital T trauma, that can have on a woman physically, mentally, emotionally. Let's just stop being like, oh, don't worry, just have a little bit of major surgery, no biggie. When actually, thankfully, there's companies like Fertility who are offering the menstrual blood test. So that would be
so good to know. Amazing. And what would be the solutions? I know it depends on like what the imbalance is, but what are some of the most common imbalances that you see, and what's like an overview? How would you treat it? Would you do things vaginally or internally or from both angles? So sorry to leave you on a cliffhanger, guys, but just remember that this is a 2-part episode. So I'm going to leave it here for now, and definitely take time to sink in and take notes on all of that juicy information that you just learned. But definitely tune in next week. Subscribe if you haven't already, because we're going to continue the conversation on underlying causes of fertility issues. And this will include things like how stress and trauma, even mindset blockages, can affect your fertility, the term luteal phase defect, what that means, why it's important when it comes to falling pregnant, and how thyroid issues, typically underactive but also overactive, can be a part, how they can affect your chances of conception too. So yeah, see you back here next week, and I hope you enjoyed this one. I really hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, I would love for you to leave me a rating and review on your podcast app, as this helps to support the show and it allows it to reach more people with this valuable information. Come and say hi over on Instagram. I'm at Viva Natural Health. And if you haven't already, check out my website, vivanaturalhealth.co.uk, for tons more free resources and to discover how I could support you further. I currently offer one-on-one consultation packages if you want my top-level support, then more affordable group programs and self-paced online courses. So there really is something for everyone. If you're ready to change and get some answers but aren't sure which option would be best, take that first step today and apply for a free enrollment call on my website, and we'll discuss the best steps for you to take in order to achieve hormonal harmony. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll see you back here next week for another episode.